Welcome back to another Man's Cave video. I'm Sunny and today we're going to be doing a zero clearance insert build for the Bosch 12-inch miter saw. Now overall the saw is a great saw, it's got plenty of features, but there is one glaring issue, and that is the miter saw insert. As you can see, I quickly do measure it and it is roughly half an inch, which is pretty large for an insert. And the fact that they do it in two pieces makes this one a little more different for doing the zero clearance insert. Before I forget, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe and turn on those handy dandy notifications. So let's get started with the build. The first thing you want to do is take the Allen key and measure the thickness or the width of the insert. Now, depending on the Bosch, I believe there are two variants of this insert, but if yours matches mine, you could follow along. I'm going to be using digital calipers, obviously, just to try to get as close to the thickness as I can, especially when selecting the wood. And then I'm going to actually put the plate back on, and because it's in two separate pieces, we'll have to tape it up before we take off the unit as a whole. And so I'm going to start with taping up just the middle section and then unscrew the screws so we can actually take off the unit as a whole. And like I said, this tape is just to hold the two pieces together, and then I'm going to add additional tape for support so the tape doesn't bend in when we are taking a tracing of the insert. And then I'm also just going to take an additional measurement with my straight edge just to, measure twice. And like I said, you don't want to tape over the screws initially, because then there's no way of getting to the screws unless you pop a hole. So that's why we taped over the middle and then unscrewed and then added the tape. And then once that is, you could use a razor blade, or in my case use a scribe, and then you're just going to cut off the excess tape, and this will help you when you are making the tracing of the insert. Another little tip is try to line the tape with the edges. It'll be less cutting with the razor blade. And like I said, if you are going to be cutting with the razor blade, just be careful that you don't scratch up your miter saw. And it should pop out and be pretty stable in terms of bending. So that's why we use 3 pieces of tape. And with this time, go ahead and clean up the inside with vacuum. This will help, especially when you're trying to get it flush with the top of the miter saw. And the next thing we're going to do is trace out the insert over your wood. I did have a 1/2 inch piece of birch that I'm going to be using. It's an extra scrap piece that was pretty nice, so I figured why not. Like I said, I did measure it with the calipers and it was pretty close. I'll have to sand a little bit more later on, but here I am just doing a quick check. And then I'm going to line it up with the edge of the piece of wood and then trace out the insert before I cut it. And once you do have the tracing, go ahead and cut it. You can use a jigsaw, a bandsaw, or a table saw, or even your miter saw. Honestly, I felt it best just to use a table saw and then use a bandsaw for the edges. Here you'll see I actually measured a little wrong, so I have to come back and adjust the fence a little bit more just to take off, like a 1/16 or a 32nd of an inch extra, just to make sure it was aligned with the tracing. And as with anything in my shop, I lost my push stick for my table saw, so I'm scrambling around. And luckily for me, my push stick was under the table saw, so let's get this piece cut and move on to the edges. And in order to do the round edges, you do have a few options. I'm going to be using my bandsaw. I was too lazy to switch out my resaw blade to a smaller blade, so I'm just going to use a resaw blade to cut the round edges. But you could also use a jigsaw. You could also cut it down and then use like a disc sander, or you could realistically even use your orbital sander and round off the edges. That would be, I don't think, as efficient, but use the tools that you do have. And in the next step, I'm going to be doing a dry fit of the piece. I always tend to do that, especially with all these type of projects, just to see how it is, see how the thickness is, and then if I have to, I'll mark kind of how much I need to take off, and then I'll take it off with the sander, or my drum sander. Or you don't want to use a planer because it's so thin of a piece and you take off. It's recommended just using like a sander. An orbital sander is fine. And then, as you can see here, I'm putting it back in after I made some adjustments, and then I'm using a straight edge to see if I could get it flush, because when you do screw it down, it is going to be pushed down a lot more. And then the next step is we're going to actually mark the holes. Now you don't need the tape anymore, so I mean you can keep it on if you want. I just took it off, but the holes are actually towards the inner side of the hole, or the screws are. So if you do have the same model as me, just make sure you mark towards the inside and not towards the outside of the holes when you are making that. And you could use a scribe, you could use a pencil, whatever floats your boat, but we're going to be marking it, and you want to make sure you're really accurate on this part. Otherwise you'll have to drill bigger holes and run into issues. So now a little tip is you do want to start with a smaller bit for accuracy, like I said, because the accuracy for the holes is really important. So I started with the smaller bit, and then I did have a countersink bit. You do need to countersink these bits, just so your wood pieces can slide over the insert pretty smooth. I did find that the countersink bit wasn't working too well. It was a pretty janky set, so I actually am going to switch to a Forstner bit and really dive down. And like I said, this part you got to be really, really careful, because if you drill too far, the screw will have nothing to latch onto and to hold down. So just make sure you are checking this often. As you can see with each screw, I'm constantly putting it in, checking if I got the correct depth, and then I'll run a straight edge across it to see if it's going smooth or if it glides across pretty smooth. Like I said, take your time with this step because it is very important. And then here with the next step, I'm going to do a quick cleanup with my sander. Any splinters or edges, you don't, like I said, you don't want to sand too much, just because you want to make sure it does match the thickness properly. And then I'll rush over and do another quick dry fit before we cut. And then here I'm putting the screws in, and then gonna run my straight edge across just to make sure that it does glide across properly. And you'll see me do adjustments in the video, and then play with the thickness or play with the tightness of each screw to see if I can get it flush. So my plate did take a little more adjusting with the screws. I had to tighten the corners, tighten the back, and play with it obviously, but I eventually got it. And then I'll do another check to make sure my straight edge is going across, and I was running into a little bit of a bump on it, and then so here I am adjusting the screws even more. And like I said, this part is inevitable. You'll run into it, so just make sure you are prepared and you don't get discouraged if it's not as smooth when you first do it. But like I said, you could fix it and adjust from there. And here I did get it straight across, and then we'll get it ready for cutting. And then you set your miter to 0 and then just do a straight cut across. I didn't want to add finish to mine because I like the look of the maple. And then but yeah, it's your choice. And then I'll run the straight edge across again, because like I said, you want to just to do it right this first time, and then so you don't have to adjust it later on. And voila, it is smooth and flush. It is key getting a really good straight edge. This will help you in your shop and all your builds. And here's a quick video of the miter saw with the new 0 clearance insert. Like I said, I would recommend this to everyone, especially if you have the Bosch and other miter saws. It really does improve, and it is an easy build. We don't need that anymore. And as always, thank you for watching this video. I do appreciate the support. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and check out some of my other cool videos.